Tess's fingers trembled as she ran them over the invitation. It felt heavier than any paper had a right to be, the words embossed in red ink, thick, dark, almost sticky. The message was brief, an invitation to dine at Adrienne Valois's private table. Only 12 guests will join him in the mountains, dress in black, no electronics, no questions, 8 p.m. Tess had heard the stories, the rumors. Valois was more than a chef. He was a cult legend. Some said he had a pact with dark forces, that each bite of his food cost his patrons a piece of their soul. She told herself it was nonsense, urban myths cooked up to enhance the mystery surrounding his notorious pop-up events. But this invitation didn't feel like nonsense, it felt like something ominous. As the night of the dinner approached, Tess's stomach tightened with dread and excitement. This was it, her golden ticket. She could already picture her article, Dining with the Devil, the untold story of Adrienne Valois. She boarded the bus arranged for them, an old creaking vehicle that snaked up a winding mountain road. The other guests were quiet, their faces hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats or silk scarves. She recognized a few, a tech CEO, a reclusive author, a politician notorious for his cruelty. Their eyes gleamed with a shared hunger. When they reached the abandoned monastery, the driver wordlessly opened the door. The guests filed out, moving as one into the vast, candle-lit hall. A chill ran down Tess's spine as she glanced around, noticing ancient relics and grotesque carvings peeking from the shadows. Adrienne Valois stood silently at the head of the table, his face unreadable as he surveyed the guests before him. In the dim candlelight, his pale eyes seemed to glint with something almost predatory, as though he were savoring them before they'd even taken a bite. With a flick of his wrist, he motioned to a masked server who stepped forward carrying a silver platter. When the server lifted the lid, the guests gasped. The dish was unlike anything Tess had ever seen. Thin, twisting tendrils arranged in delicate coils, glistening with oil. They were fleshy, pale and slick, each one seeming to glisten with a viscous crimson sheen that caught the candlelight. They writhed slightly as though some faint, lingering impulse was keeping them alive, twitching under the touch of the tongs. "Our first course is despair," Adrienne murmured, his voice soft and cold, harvested from a man who knew nothing but anguish. His suffering, distilled and transformed for your appreciation. The guests glanced uneasily at one another. Tess noticed the politician across from her reach for his water glass, his hand trembling as his eyes fixed on the tendrils with something between revulsion and fascination. One by one, the guests lifted their forks, hesitating, their movements slow and unsure. Tess swallowed hard, telling herself this was simply some elaborate culinary illusion. She lifted a forkful, her hand shaking, and brought it closer. The smell hit her first, a coppery tang, sharp and metallic, mingling with a sickly sweet scent that reminded her of raw meat left too long in the heat. Her stomach turned, but her curiosity was stronger than her revulsion. The tendril was soft, almost yielding against her fork. As she placed it in her mouth, the texture was even worse than she'd imagined. Rubbery, faintly elastic, as if it were resisting her teeth. When she bit down, a dark liquid oozed out, coating her tongue in a rush of sour, salty bitterness that made her gag. Instantly, a wave of nausea hit her, and with it, a vision. Images flooded her mind, crashing into her like a tidal wave. Visions of fire and smoke, a man screaming as he watched his home burn, his family trapped inside, his cries swallowed by the flames. Tess gasped, feeling as though she were suffocating, her throat closing as the man's despair seeped into her own veins. She could hear his voice, raw and broken, echoing inside her skull. She forced herself to swallow, feeling the tendril slide down her throat, heavy and cold. As it settled in her stomach, an unsettling realization dawned on her. The texture, the look of the tendril. Her mind circled around a single, horrific possibility, a suspicion too grotesque to voice. Beside her, the CEO coughed, choking back bile, his face ashen. He put down his fork, glancing around the table with wide eyes. "Is this?" His voice trailed off, unwilling to finish the thought, but the look on his face mirrored Tess's own unease. Adrian's thin smile widened. "Does it not intrigue you?" he asked, his voice a velvet purr. "The depth of emotion contained within a single bite? I've spent years perfecting my art, extracting suffering from the flesh itself, distilling it until only the purest essence remains." The words lingered in the air, chilling in their implication. Tess looked down at her plate, her stomach twisting as she studied the remaining tendrils. The shape, the soft ridges along their length, it all seemed horrifically familiar, like something ripped from deep inside a body. She could almost see them as they might have been, coiled within a human abdomen, pulsing with life. The politician beside her was trembling, his fork clattering to the plate. He looked pale, beads of sweat dotting his brow as he struggled to hold back his horror. You can't be serious," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Adrian's eyes flicked to him, a flicker of amusement dancing in their pale depths. "I assure you, everything here tonight is quite authentic." Tess felt a wave of revulsion wash over her, bile rising in her throat. She fought to keep her composure, to push down the realization gnawing at her mind, but her imagination betrayed her, conjuring images of the tendrils in their original form, twisting, pulsing, pulled from a living body in an agony too profound to comprehend. All around the table, the guests were shuddering, their faces pale as they grappled with their own understanding. Some clutched at their stomachs, others at their throats, as though trying to dispel the visceral horror that Adrian's words had planted in their minds. Adrian's gaze swept over them, a slight satisfied smile tugging at his lips. "True despair, my friends," he murmured, "is not just tasted, it is absorbed. It becomes part of you, lingers in your blood, in your dreams. Tonight you have been given a rare opportunity to partake in something few dare to experience." He raised his own fork, piercing one of the tendrils and bringing it to his lips. As he chewed, his face took on a look of rapture, his eyes fluttering closed as if he were savoring the very essence of anguish. The guests were silent, each one caught in their own torment, unable to speak, to move, to react. They had come for an experience, for a taste of something otherworldly, and they were getting exactly what they'd asked for. The courses grew darker, each one paired with a story. Adrian described the sources of each dish with disturbing detail, stories of heartbreak, betrayal, violence. The second course was survivor's guilt, a thick, oozing stew that clung to the guests' throats, making them gag. "It's from a soldier," Adrian explained, "the only survivor of a horrific massacre. He carried the weight of his fallen comrades, their screams echoing in his mind until he succumbed." Tess forced herself to eat, trying to keep her composure, but as she swallowed, she felt herself slipping, as if she were standing in a battlefield, feeling bullets whiz by her head, hearing screams all around her. Her stomach churned, bile rising to her throat. The other guests were visibly shaken. The politician beside her was sweating, wiping his brow as he gagged, his face pale. What is this?" he gasped, clutching his chest. "How is this possible?" Adrian's gaze turned icy. "Those who question the meal are welcome to leave. However, doing so may have consequences." The politician said nothing further, but Tess noticed he was shaking. Chapter 4, Deceit. As the courses continued, each more grotesque than the last, the atmosphere grew tense. Adrian's assistants brought out a third course, a series of thin slices of meat, almost translucent, with a sheen that looked unnatural. Adrian called it Deceit. "This one comes from a man who lived a double life," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "He cheated on his wife, deceived his friends, built an empire on lies. The very essence of his deceit is infused into this dish." Tess took a reluctant bite. Her mouth filled with a metallic taste like rust and rot, and she felt the weight of the man's lies pressing down on her. Her thoughts grew muddled, her vision blurred, and she felt as though her own mind were fragmenting, pieces of her identity slipping away like sand through her fingers. Around her, she heard guests whispering, confessing things in strangled gasps, secrets they would never have shared under any other circumstances. I can't take this," muttered the tech CEO. This is poison." Adrian smiled, a wicked glint in his eyes. Poison, or perhaps revelation. The line is thin. Chapter 5. The Hidden Room. As the courses continued, each one growing more unpalatable, Tess felt herself reaching her limit. When Adrian and his servers slipped away to prepare the next dish, she seized her chance to explore. Slipping out of the dining hall, she wandered down a narrow corridor, her footsteps echoing in the dark. At the end of the hall, she found a small, unmarked door. Pushing it open, she was greeted by a sight that made her blood run cold. The room was filled with glass jars, each one containing something grotesque: eyes, fingers, tongues, preserved in murky liquid. But that wasn't the worst of it. There were photos pinned to the walls, each depicting Adrian standing beside people in various stages of agony. A closer look revealed that the faces of some of her fellow diners were among them. Her hand flew to her mouth, stifling a scream. These weren't just ingredients. They were his victims, people he had carefully selected, studied, and broken down piece by piece. Enjoying the exhibit? Adrian's voice came from behind her. She turned, heart racing as he stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with a cold amusement. "You see, I don't just cook food, Miss Tess. I cook emotions, memories, sins. I distill them, extract the essence of a person until there's nothing left. Then I serve it back, and watch as others consume their agony." He reached out, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "Tonight you're not just a guest. You're an ingredient." Back in the dining hall, Tess's mind raced, her vision blurring from fear. She sat frozen, watching as Adrian's assistants wheeled out a final platter covered in a silver cloche. Adrian stepped forward, his expression solemn. "Tonight's final course is the culmination of a journey," he said, his voice almost reverent. "This one is curiosity." Tess's heart stopped as Adrian lifted the cloche, revealing a plate holding something that looked disturbingly familiar. It was a slice of flesh, slightly charred, and next to it was a small vial filled with a dark, viscous liquid. "Curiosity is a powerful thing," Adrian murmured, his gaze fixed on Tess. "It brought you here, didn't it? Led you down a path you couldn't turn away from. And now, it will be your undoing." Tess felt her throat tighten as Adrian lifted the vial, tipping a single drop of the liquid onto her plate. The scent was overpowering, a mix of rot and iron, and she felt her body react violently, her skin crawling as the memories of everyone who had come before her surged through her mind. Adrian placed a fork in her hand. "Go on, take a bite." She tried to pull away, but his grip was unyielding. Her hand moved of its own accord, the fork piercing the flesh on the plate. As she brought it to her lips, she felt an overwhelming wave of nausea, her senses assaulted by the screams, the despair, the horror of the lives Adrian had consumed. As she swallowed, she felt her own mind fracturing, pieces of her identity slipping away, dissolving into the void. Her memories, her thoughts, her very essence pulled into Adrian's twisted masterpiece. The last thing she saw before the darkness claimed her was Adrian's face, his expression one of satisfaction, a chef savoring his finest creation. The bus left the monastery as quietly as it had come, carrying the empty, soulless shells of the diners back down the mountain. Tess's camera, left running on the table, captured the silent, empty dining hall, the faint echo of laughter lingering in the air. Weeks after the dinner, an unmarked package arrived at the headquarters of the New World Review, Tess's employer. Inside, the editor found a hard drive and a note, written in Tess's unmistakable handwriting, "For publication upon receipt. My final story. Tess." The editor, Tom, who had been anxiously awaiting any word from Tess after her mysterious disappearance, was both relieved and confused. He connected the drive to his computer, fingers twitching with apprehension. The files were labeled in chronological order, each one a recording of the night's events from Tess's hidden camera. Tom leaned in, drawn into the screen as the chilling details unfolded. The courses, the grotesque descriptions, the agony on the guests' faces, and finally, Adrian's monologue. When he reached the final recording, he watched Tess take her final bite, her face contorted in horror, and then the screen went black. He sat back, numb, disturbed, and ready to shut off his computer when a new file suddenly appeared on the desktop. It was titled Deceit. Hesitantly, he clicked on it. The video showed a sterile kitchen, pristine and cold. A camera focused on a single, elegant dish centered on a black plate, a delicate pastry topped with a thin drizzle of crimson sauce. Adrian's voice, smooth and commanding, filled the room as he appeared in frame, wearing a serene, satisfied smile. "Welcome, dear viewers," Adrian intoned, gazing into the camera. "This is my gift to you all, Tess's ambition." Tom's stomach dropped as Adrian continued, explaining that he'd anticipated Tess's desire to uncover his secrets. "I knew she'd bring her camera, hoping to expose me. But ambition, unchecked, ravenous ambition, well, that's what I thrive on." The screen cut to a clip of Adrian meticulously plating small, delicate portions, shavings of raw flesh, fragments of tendon, each one arranged with surgical precision. "My art is meant to be shared," he murmured, his voice smooth as he worked. "And Tess, with all her ambition, will now be consumed by thousands." Tom's hands trembled as the realization hit. Adrian had somehow ensured Tess's essence was preserved, distilled, in the digital files themselves, ready to be unleashed upon anyone who watched. Every scream, every ounce of fear, her final agony, all of it embedded, now seeping from the screen. He felt a strange pull, a dark compulsion, as though Tess's final moments were worming their way into his mind, taking root. And it wasn't just him. The entire newsroom was drawn to the screen, unable to look away. As the video played on, Adrian's voice grew louder, his eyes locking with the camera, his smile twisting into something sinister. "This story will consume you." In that moment, Tom understood. Adrian's masterpiece wasn't just for the 12 guests that night. It was meant for every viewer who dared to watch. He had created a new type of feast, one that transcended the physical, a digital dish that would drive anyone who saw it to the brink of madness. Adrian's art wasn't confined to flesh anymore. It had evolved, infecting minds, spreading terror until the boundaries of reality and horror dissolved. A knock on the door jolted Tom. "Come in," he muttered, still transfixed. The door creaked open, and Tess walked in, her eyes vacant, a hollow smile on her lips. "Hi, Tom," she whispered, her voice distant, almost mechanical. "Adrian said it was time for me to serve."